Hello YouTube, this is Goddard Radio Mosky here again with another beer review for you today. This is my first beer review reporting to you from Heidelberg in Baden-Württemberg in Germany, of course. I'm at Ruprecht Karls Universität Heidelberg for 4 months. I'm writing up my master's thesis, if you like, so I have 4 months here. So 4 months of German beer reviews coming up for you, although I have heard there's a really good beer shop just up in Darmstadt to the south of Frankfurt. So hopefully I can get up there and maybe get some really random stuff for you up there. But anyway, I'm going to take you to one of the local breweries here in Heidelberg, and this is the Brauerei zum Klosterhof, and we're going to have a little look at their Weizen beer today. So here's the bottle. So you can see it's got one of these nice sort of pop caps on it that you would associate with Grolsch at home probably. So quite looking forward to trying this one. The locals have really spoken very highly of this brewery, and I mean if the locals like it then it's obviously going to be very, very good. But as is usual with my beer reviews, I'll just take you through a brief history of the monastery that this brewery is associated with, and of course of the brewery itself. But as I always say, if you are simply just interested in the tasting of this beer, then feel free to go on towards the latter part of the video and you will catch that particular segment. But anyway, the brewery itself is a fairly new brewery. It was only founded in 2009, but as I mentioned, it's linked to a very old monastery called the Neuburg, and the monastery is on the northern bank of the Neckar River, which runs right through Heidelberg, and it's located on the southern slope of the Kopfwil mountain between Neuenheim and the Ziegelhausen districts in Heidelberg, of course. But in 1130 the Neuburg monastery was founded as a male-only Benedictine monastery. Those of you who are more into your Christianity might know a bit more about the different sort of sects, if you like, or different types of monks and things like that. I'm not so into my Christianity, I have to say. But apparently this was a branch of the Lorch monastery, the Neuburg monastery, and at the request of the first Count Palatinate Conrad von Stauffen, who was the Lord Abbot of Sieghard of Schauenberg, the monastery was changed into an independent nun monastery, and it remained like this until 1562. But as you'll see with the history of this monastery, it kind of jumps around a little bit. The parent monastery changes quite a lot, and indeed the events at the local monastery change quite a bit as well. But in 1232 the Lorch monastery, as I mentioned, the mother monastery of the Neuburg, was dissolved, and the rights of this Neuburg monastery passed to the Bishop of Mainz and then the Worms monastery, and the Worms monastery actually held control of the Neuburg until 1806. However, documents have shown that the monastery was converted into a Zisterzienster monastery with the support of the Schonau monastery in 1303, and under the Prince Elector, I think this might just be the heir to the German throne, if you like, Frederick I the Victorious, the monastery returned to the Benedictines in 1460. And at the time of the Protestant Reformation, I believe this was 1517, the nuns actually left the monastery just a bit later in 1562, and this led to the dissolution of the Neuburg. At this point the monastery was actually owned by Brigitta, who was the cousin of the Prince Elector Otto Heinrich, Otto Henry if you like in English, and after the nuns left she changed the building into an aristocratic home for women, and in the house was actually occupied for a period during her time owning the place by Prince Graf and his wife of the Stift family, and this is today why the monastery is called Stift Neuburg. It's quite cool that this has remained from this period, of course. But in 1706 the monastery was turned over to the Jesuits in 1706 by Prince Elector John William, and during their time they expanded the monastery and grew it until the order of prohibition from Pope Clemens XIV in 1773. But the monastery actually also became associated for a period with the University of Heidelberg, where I'm researching, and this happened in 1798 after approval from the Prince Elector. However, in 1804 the monastery went into private ownership again, and it changed hands many times after this period. It was owned for a while by the famous German author Karl von Weber, and later it was actually owned by Johann Friedrich Heinrich Schlosser, who was from Frankfurt, and he was actually a relation and friend of the famous German writer and politician Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and they say that the building became somewhat of a centre for Romanticism at this time. There was a lot of intellectual guests here, and this included the philosopher Friedrich Schlegel and the writer Clemens Brentano, of course, actually. Now in 1908 the property was bought by its final private owner, who was Alexander von Bernis, and it was the meeting place of many intellectuals of the time, of course. You had Rudolf Steiner, who was an Austrian philosopher, Stefan George, who was a German poet, Friedrich Gundalf, who was a German Jewish poet and scholar, Wilhelm Trubner, who was a painter, of course, and finally Klaus Mann, who was a German writer. Now Alexander von Bernis sold the monastery to the Benedictine monks once again in 1926, and then in 1929 Adalbert of Neuburg was installed as the first abbot of Neuburg. So in 1926 the monastery went back into religious hands, if you like. Now the monastery underwent renovation in the late 1940s and then once again in the 1960s, and in 1988 this saw the appointment of Father Francis Heermann, who is the fourth abbot of Neuburg Neuburg, and he remains in charge of the monastery to this day. And then further renovations of the monastery were carried out in 2001 and then also in 2010, and today there are 15 monks living in the Neuburg monastery, and they're actually very well versed in breeding fish and cattle, but they're also really well renowned for their horticulture and garden expertise actually. But to move on to the history of the brewery itself, as I mentioned earlier, the brewery only opened in 2009, in October to be exact, and it's attached to the monastery. Their brew kit is actually German made. It was actually bought from a defunct brewery in Mallorca in the Balearic Islands of Spain, but they specialise in brewing organic beer, as I mentioned, so it's quite interesting in this regard. And at first they only produced the 0.33 litre bottles, but in 2010 they changed to producing the half litres with the introduction of their Pils beer, and they've been further expanding their range since they introduced these half litre bottles. But the water in Heidelberg is actually one of the best in Germany, and it's very soft with low mineral content, and this makes it ideal for brewing beer. And they're actually quite proud of the fact that they've been one of the first to tap this water source, and it actually doesn't need any treatment at all. A lot of the industrial breweries in Germany will treat their water to give it a certain taste and certain properties before going into the brewery, but they're actually very proud that they don't have to do this with their water, and they do say that they're actually very surprised that they're the first brewery that have done this, of course. But apparently they also use a wide variety of malts for each of their different beers, and this allows a better extraction of the sugars and thus a more rounded flavour of the beers. But the brewers also like to use aromatic hops, and they actually have their own specialist hop farmer called Friedrich, who is from the Hallertau region in Bavaria, and the brewers actually have a particular affection for the Cascade and Fox hops apparently. And of course this beer is brewed in accordance with the Reinheitsgebot, the Bavarian or German purity law, which was 1506 or something like that, I believe it was. But to just tell you a little bit about the other beers that the Klosterhof Brauerei do, there's the classic range. This includes the amber, the wheat, the dark, the bright, the Kellerbock, the Pils, and the amber wheat beer, of course. This one is a member of the classic range, of course, there. They also have their seasonal beers, which includes the Advent Bock, the Fox hops, the Maibock, the Marches, and the Weizen Bock. And they also have a number of beers that they call seal beers, and these are matured in different casks, a bit like the innocent gun beers that we have in Scotland, of course. But let's get on to the actual tasting of this beer itself. This one is a 4.9% Naturtrüb Hefeweizen. This is a term I've come across when I've been in Germany. They have Dunkel Hefeweizens, Crystal Hefeweizens, and also the Naturtrüb Hefeweizen. So this is just basically an unfiltered Hefeweizen. So this will be cloudy, I would expect, when I open this up here, and you'll get the Crystals, of course, which are the clear ones, and the Dunkels are the really dark Hefeweizens. But I'll just bring up the camera again and let you have just a little look at the bottle here, if I can find my cursor. There we are. But here I'll just let you have a little look at the bottle, of course. As you can see, the Brauerei zum Klosterhof here. It's actually, you can see the sort of hops on the top here. It's quite a nice little label actually. You can see the sort of outline of the monastery building there. I might actually take a little walk down and visit the monastery, because it really is only about a 5-minute walk from where I'm staying actually. And as you can see on the top label here, it says it's a bio beer, and you can see, pardon me, you can see the Weizen there, of course. And some of these beers in Germany that have these little pop taps actually have a little engraving on the top there, but this one doesn't. But without further ado, let's get this guy open and we'll get on with my first German beer review of my time in Germany. So this is a pop cap, so as usual, that one actually went quite well, of course. Some of them just go absolutely crazy, but let's get this guy out and get on with the tasting. As you can see, just a little bit of smoke as I opened this up here. But it was one thing that was quite funny. When I was drinking in one of the pubs here, one of the German guys said to me, I was just sitting with my beer open like this, he says, "Oh, I can tell you're foreign." And I was like, "Why?" And he's like, "You left the cap off your beer." And apparently, like Germans, they will always close this to keep the beer fresh, but I think they drink slower than we do usually, so I'm not sure if it matters too much, but the Germans always do that themselves. So it was quite an interesting little conversation I had with this local Heidelberg guy. But that's enough of the beer just now. As you can see, it's a really beautiful kind of cloudy golden colour, as you would expect from the sort of Naturtrüb Hefeweizen colour. It's got a nice sort of maybe two and a bit finger head there. It's big and frothy. It's going to die down a little bit, then I can get the rest of the beer in for you there, of course. But as you can see, a really beautiful cloudy green colour, or cloudy golden colour there actually. I can see a lot of carbonation here on this one, so this one, as you would expect, will be quite interesting for a Hefeweizen. I really love the German Hefeweizen style, of course. But in terms of the aroma here, it does smell like a Hefeweizen. It smells like a really good Hefeweizen, of course. There's a lot of wheat and banana, as you would expect. A little bit of clove in there too. But yeah, there's a good bit of yeast and bready notes, which is, this is the characteristics of this style of beer, of course. but there's a good bit of citrus in there and actually some herbal character to the hops. But it's a really interesting one, and as I say, I've never had one of these so-called organic beers, if you like, so this one should be really quite interesting to try. But yeah, let's see if I can get the last little bit of this in here. The head's died down just a little bit. As you can see, there we go. Pop the cap back on this, stick it back down. But as you can see, really beautiful looking beer. The head's died down to about a finger now. Really nice German frothy head on this one, of course, here. But in terms of the taste, in terms of the aroma here, yeah, a lot of like wheat aromas, bready, as you would expect from this type of beer. It's a really beautiful smelling beer, this one. If you're in Heidelberg, give the local beer a try. I've had a few of these when I've been in the pub, and they're actually really good beers, but from different breweries, of course. I've not tried anything from this brewery yet. But yeah, let's give this guy a taste and see how we get on here. It's actually quite a mild flavoured one, this. Yeah, it's quite a mild one. It's got a nice sort of wet and sweet flavour to it. There's nice citrusy notes there. And the banana flavours and bready malts are quite, it's a sort of very wet flavour and a very mild flavour. There's a little bit of spice character to it perhaps in the flavour as well. It's actually a very smooth one. I would normally expect a Weiss beer or a Hefeweizen to be a bit more carbonated than this, but it's very smooth. But yeah, it's quite a sweet one. It's got a nice sort of bready and cake sweetness to this one, I would describe it as, actually. But there's some nice citrus notes mixed in there with the banana flavours, but there's big bready malts in there. But it is rather mild at the same time, and there is maybe just a little bit of spice character at the end. I would say it finishes with the citrus coming out a little bit more, and it's actually slightly dry, but the wheat kind of lingers quite a little bit, and the banana flavour is there in the finish as well. I really like this one, but it's quite a different style of Hefeweizen, probably just because it is one of these bio beers, in fact. As you can see, it's leaving a good bit of lacing in the glass as well, and the head is retaining fairly well, but that's going to fade just over time, I guess, probably because I've drunk a little bit of it fairly quickly. But yeah, really nice kind of mild and sort of sweet bready flavour to it. You're picking up some grains actually in this as well, and that it complements the flavour quite well. But this is a really mild Hefeweizen. It's not really so much of a pungent one as you would sometimes expect from Germany. In terms of the mouthfeel of this one, I would say it's kind of mid-bodied. It's actually not very carbonated for a Hefeweizen. It's a very smooth one, and this isn't what I've kind of come to expect from the German Hefeweizens, but maybe again, it's just because it's one of these bio beers, but it's really interesting. But yeah, it's actually got some kind of slightly dry character to it as well. It kind of lingers to it, just particularly on the end it comes out a bit more. But this is a really easy drinking one. As I mentioned, it's not very carbonated, so you can drink this one fairly quickly actually. But that's not the German way of drinking, of course. They like to sort of savour their beers a little bit. They are very slow drinkers here in Germany actually. But yeah, this is a nice Hefeweizen. It's something a little bit different, so my recommendation for this one would be, it's quite an interesting one. If you're in the Heidelberg region of Germany, definitely give it a try, or even come to the city and take a little look at the monastery. I've got another 3 of these to review for you, so before I do those, I will try and take a little trip to up to the monastery, and in one of the videos at least I can give you a little bit more about their brewing process and stuff, because you'll obviously be able to ask them about that there. As I mentioned, a really nice Hefeweizen that's very different from the ones I've had before from Germany, of course. So if you get the chance, give it a try. But I hope you've enjoyed this beer review. I've enjoyed trying this one. As I say, it's really cool to try the local beers in Germany that we don't get a lot of the time in Scotland. So hopefully you found it informative and the beer's not too obscure for you. I hope you'll enjoy my German series of beer reviews over the next 4 months or so. But thanks again for watching my beer reviews. Please let me know in the comments section if by chance any of you have actually tried this beer. Always interesting to hear people's own thoughts on the beer. But over the next few months, I will have some of the more well-known German breweries, and of course a lot of local beer as well. And I might be going to Austria at some point, so hopefully I can do my first few Austrian beer reviews for you as well. But thanks again for watching my beer reviews. Please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. You've been watching Goddard Radio Moscow, and I'll catch you soon with another beer review. Cheers.